Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today. Today we're going to be talking about our new news plans and some interesting developments in the evolution of our process for our fact database and how we're writing content. I'm Chad Hill and I'm joined by Adam Stetzer.
Yeah, good afternoon. Chad, very excited to be talking about these news plans. I'm up here in the Rochester office and I'm joined by a good portion of our staff. Say good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Chad, I'm really looking forward to hearing about these today.
Awesome. Let's jump right in. So I wanted to start off today going back to our last webinar. We had some really good feedback. I talked to several of you after that last call, and many people said it was really fun kind of looking at these different types of content that we showed and voting on this intent as it stands against the webmaster guidelines that we reviewed in the last webinar. So I wanted to run through the results and then talk about how these news plans really, I think, give people more of what they like and move us, further and further away from the stuff that we don't like anymore. So let's start off with some of the worst offenders. Here's a great comment that everyone voted, and I believe in this case, looks like almost 90% of you said that this did look like there was intent to manipulate the search rankings. You can see content interjected with different commercial terms. Next one up was the good old-fashioned directory, which there's millions of these things out there. Again, a little less of a response here, but still a good 70% or so said that directories are out, they don't help, and there's intent to, by doing this, there's intent to manipulate the rankings. Another one was good old favorite, a site-wide blog link. You can see here that on this particular blog there are links to dentist websites, Dentist Flora Park, Dentist Hollis Queens. So again, pretty high response there. Looks like about 80% said not good. We're now into an article with a geo-targeted anchor link. Again, these things stick out like sore thumbs. It's 80 to 90% of people saying, yeah, that's not good. Almost done with this. Two more to go. Now here's one that it was an interesting one. This was an article on a newspaper. It's clearly at the bottom here there is a link that talks about efficient cleaners. This one's a little closer. You can tell this is on a real website. There's a bit of a process for getting this up there, but still it was a little over the line. A little more than half said, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Let's keep going. Now we're in the positive territory where people are starting to feel pretty comfortable with things. This is a good one where there was an article written about a news event, and in that news event there was a quote here from somebody talking about the importance of checking your brakes. And then the final one that we threw up was actually a case here where there was about 70, looks like 7% or so of people saying that this particular survey that we did on native advertising, that there was no intent. This was something that was a surprise or completely on the right side of when you looked at the webmaster guidelines. So it was very interesting to do this study. We want to turn this kind of research into an ebook maybe because it's very enlightening to us, but it also fits really well in with what we're about to look at, because what we wanted to do is to give, again, everyone more of the things that they felt comfortable with and liked. And that's what we've done here. So we want to roll out today two new plans. What we've done is we just modeled this after our SEO Basic and our SEO Intermediate. These are both live in the dashboard today. They actually rolled out yesterday, but they're live in the dashboard today. So anyone who's interested in this can either immediately go sign up a new campaign, or if this is something you'd like to switch your plan to, just feel free to get in touch with our AM and we can make that change as well. But let's walk through these plans and talk about how all these different features work. Most of the content and types of stories are things you've heard of, but what we've done is just changed the amount of each one. So on-site content and the SEO Basic News and SEO Intermediate News, they are going from, in I think both cases, around one piece of content, and now they'll have 2 on-site content for the basic and 3 for the intermediate. And we're going to talk about why more on-site content in just 1 minute, but sort of make a note of that this is more than we have been doing, but we're going to talk about this in just a second. Press release, we're sticking with 1 a month. Business Quote, also one a month. Both of those will continue to have the outbound press team contacting your end client. That's going very well, and we're continuing to train. We're actually adding staff to that team, so we're really excited about the direction that's heading. Featured news, which again we'll talk about this in just a second, but currently we're going to be, the SEO Basic will have one, and the Intermediate will have two. And then for an infographic, we're going to have 2 infographics on the Intermediate, 0 on the Basic. And then the RSS, social, Twitter, that stays the same as it was, but on the current SEO Basic and Intermediate plan. So 6 of each of those on the Basic and 8 on the Intermediate. Now, the base price that would be in the dashboard that you'd see today would be $3.99 and $6.39, same price that you would see for the regular SEO Basic and SEO Intermediate. I did put up here, though, because to really get maximum value out of these, in fact, it's required that you add Premium Writer, because we need Premium Writer for essentially all the content types here. And then to get the maximum value, we strongly recommend the PR Web upgrade. So if you add in Premium Writer and the PR Web upgrade, it's $523 for the SEO Basic and $793 for the SEO Intermediate. Okay, so let's talk more about this process and how this is all going to work. So we put together this diagram that we want to walk through, and there's a lot to this, and so I think people are probably going to have to look at this today. We'll have to definitely talk about this a few more times. But the introduction for today is that we're changing our process a bit. So if you think about what we are doing, is we actually have dedicated team members making outbound phone calls every day to different community newspapers, and we're getting a very good response. A lot of these community newspapers are having a hard time keeping up with all the digital media, social media, and of course ad revenue is going down as more people shift from printed papers to online. So they're looking for new and interesting ways of getting good content on their website, and we're coming to the rescue there. But what we have to do is we ultimately are having to give them content that they want published in their market. So let's then review kind of our process for how we're doing this. We know the final product is an article on a local community newspaper, but let's talk about how we're going to make that make sense for your customer. So on the far left-hand side, over on the on-site content, many of you know that we're currently, or all of you probably know that we're currently writing on-site content, and when we do that, we have facts that are presented to our writers that they can then use to improve the quality of that content. What we haven't been doing in the past is we haven't really been keeping track of which fact goes into each piece of content, and that's going to become important. So going forward, when we write content, it's going to be more and more important that we get interesting and relevant facts embedded in those on-site content pieces. And again, walking through this process, I'll tell you why. Because what's going to happen is when we do get a publishing partner who's ready for a piece of content to be published on their website, what we're going to be doing is sort of bringing together current news events. So whether that's something that they're telling us they want a story about, and we have had that case that happened a few times. We had someone who wanted, there was fracking going on. There's fracking going on in Pennsylvania, and basically there was a community newspaper there who wanted to understand better some of the rules and regulations around that, and they had been doing some work on it, but they wanted us to write a piece that would support some of their other research. So we were able to, we were able to then get a basis for a story that we were going to write, and that was the way that story was initiated. There are other cases where some publications aren't really as, we're pitching them on ideas. So there's like, I'm not really sure what kind of stuff do you have, and when we contact them, we have a list of pitches of different ideas, seasonal ideas. We're coming up on Father's Day, so there's some different things that we can talk about to try to, grease the skids and get them to be interested in having us write a piece of content. So there's an initial idea. That idea goes into our writer research and review process. So when the writer is writing that piece of content, they will begin to see a list of client facts, not necessarily identified with any given client. In fact, it'll just be a set of interesting facts. So when they're writing that story about fracking, if we had somebody that was in the water, a client who did water filtration, let's just say, and they put together some facts and figures on purity rates of water, and we were able to include that information in their blog, now our writer might have some interesting facts that they can include in their story that are then substantiated or cited back to that client's website. So the writer has discretion to only select relevant facts. And we're going to talk about how this definitely changes the model a bit. But they're reviewing relevant facts and they're inserting them when appropriate into that piece of content. Okay, literally as a citation. So 22% of water has X level of water purity, or whatever the fact might be. So they write that story. That story then goes to the publishing partner, and it goes to the editor of that publication, who then again reads that piece of content, reviews it, makes sure that anything that's in that story is relevant and useful to their end client, and then ultimately that story goes up on their website. So you can imagine, like, wow, that really is a big change, and there's a really huge difference, because if you think about it, what's really happening in this box here, this writer research and review, is we're moving away from actually writing a piece of content for a particular client and actually changing that around so that the actual end client for that piece of content is the publication, and then ultimately what your clients are doing is advertising or presenting relevant facts to our writer. So if they don't have relevant facts, they're probably not going to get picked up, which is something we have to kind of talk about here as we work through this. So this is a big change that we've made. Now the first step in doing this is we needed to start building this fact library. So as of this month, when our writers are writing on-site content pieces, they're actually indicating which facts that they use. So we're able to tie together a fact that was included in an on-site blog post to exactly where that fact now resides on the web. So as we build this database, we can start using that to present to our writers when we're then writing a featured news piece for an end client publication. Now what we tried to kind of illustrate with some of the colors here, so I just want to walk through this, it's very subtle, is that the reality here is that these filters that we put in place here, so you're kind of bringing client facts in, you're bringing news in, what comes out through these filters isn't always exactly it's a process of editing and putting that information together, and then ultimately what the editor reviews and publishes might be slightly different too. So again, this is really how PR works, right? And we talked about PR last time and digital PR, but there isn't the same level of guarantee as you get when you write an informational article that's syndicated out to different websites. So Adam, I'm sure there's some questions out there or maybe some confusion. What do we have so far?
Yeah, I do have a question or two for you, but I think before I get to that, just to kind of recap, I mean, you said this, Chad, but the arrows on the right with the publishing partner, the newspapers, their editors reviewing and deciding what should go into their publication for their readers, and us pitching them, that's very traditional PR activity. And we've been talking about that a lot in our webinar series, and I know there have been a lot of articles talking about how SEO and PR are rapidly merging. And so I'm excited about what we're doing here because it really supports that model. But what I think is particularly unique, Chad, is then this other piece you've got where we're now merging together a content discovery and research support tool for our journalists as they prepare this stuff to then hand over to the press team to make those pitches to the newspaper editor to get the placement. So I think having that all in one place is a pretty interesting and unique service. And as you point out, there's a couple points at which we're ensuring that inclusion into that news story, and then furthermore passing the hurdle and the pitch to the editor because they say, yes, this is right for my readers, and is what they want to see, and it supports me and my ad revenue model, gives you those two layers that you want to see where you pass those reviews so that we're in the right portion of that data you opened up the webinar with of the kind of stories that really do scream, you earned this, it's appropriate, it's here for the readers, it all comes full circle. So I think this is very, very exciting. But of course, there's going to be a few hiccups with this too, and the first question that came in, Chad, is right along those lines. This is a doozy. So what happens if the client is a ball bearing manufacturer or something obscure? How in the world would we fit them into a story?
That's a great question. So I think the way we're going to have to do that is that on the next, we're going to have to look at finding something relevant and interesting with ball bearing manufacturers. Obviously, ball bearings are a critical part of the economy. They make a lot of things work. So how do we, talk about that and incorporate? And then, of course, ball bearings are probably very important for manufacturing, and manufacturing jobs are talked a lot about in the United States. So there's ways that we can work it in, but it is going to be important that the content that we're writing and able to place on the client's website, it may not always be, our ball bearings are these 7 specs. We may need to try to reach a little bit broader, make it a little bit more relevant, a little more newsworthy. And I think that's going to be one of the places that we're going to have the biggest pushback from the client. But if you don't have those extensions and expansions of content of the facts, then it's going to be very difficult to make the rest of this process work, because I can assure you that yeah, the community newspaper in Pennsylvania, although they may have ball bearing manufacturers nearby, they probably aren't going to be that interested in getting a ball bearing quote or fact into their story about fracking.
Right, but Chad, I don't think this is as hard as people may think it is at first blush. And if you've been through any PR training or interview prep training, or you've worked with any political candidates ever in your career, then you know about the concept of bridging. And bridging is this idea in PR where you're trying to convey one story, but you want to end up a little bit left of center of where that is, and you figure out how to put that all together in a way that flows very logical and still makes for a very compelling case. And again, the politicians use it in their speaking points, and you've probably seen it a million times. They're asked one question, but they really want to answer a question that's 2 shades over to the side of the question they were asked. So they start by answering it, but then they weave their way over to what they really wanted to say. That's a process called bridging. Journalists use it as well. So I think that we can accomplish a lot here if we stay focused on this idea that you have to have useful things on your website. And if you really think about that, we're back to the basics of what Google and Matt Cutts tells us is really what we should be doing in SEO, which is make sure you have something very, very useful on your website. And I think what we're saying here is to make sure it's broad enough that it can be bridged into many different news stories and events that are happening. It's useful and broad enough, and so you'll be able to work your way into these stories.
Yeah, excellent point. Well, I did want to talk about the client impact, and Adam, we talked there. That was the initial question that came in, and there will be other questions like that. And I do actually want to say one more thing on the on-site content. Now, there may be cases where a client wants to have their marketing message supported in blog posts, and we may be able to get the client facts worked into more industry news section. We have a client right now who has their corporate blog, but they actually also have an industry news section of their blog that they actually outsource to another news service who pipes in relevant information that fills out that section. So there definitely are some creative ways that we can approach this, but the most important thing is that we do need to get relevant, useful information in those blog posts or on the client's website so that they can be presented when our writers are writing the featured news pieces. But let's talk about the client impact. So there is no guarantee on a link, because at the end of the day, as Adam said, there are 2 places where a person is reviewing the appropriateness of and the relevance of whatever fact that might be. The writer will be doing it, and then ultimately so will the editor who is publishing it on that community newspaper. So there's no guarantees. There are going to be some new metrics here, and we're not quite there yet to actually paying on an impression basis, but we want to start getting people familiar, and again, this is not getting rolled out today or tomorrow. We will inform you on a future webinar, but we want to start talking about these things. We're going to start talking about impressions. How many times were your facts presented? The reason that's important is, and the next one, take rate is important, is because we need to start understanding, in the case of the ball bearing person, if we focus too much on the wrong set of facts and they're not relevant, we want to know how many times they're being presented, because maybe we need to do some more work to incorporate more facts into the client's website. Again, this helps this process, but as Adam said, this also helps in general. You want useful, relevant information on the client's website. Additionally, we're going to be able to finally get to a place where we can start to pull together some really interesting audience stats, because the newspaper publications will be working with them on promoting some of their content from a social media standpoint. So there'll be good stats and information that we'll be able to pull back and present to the client about the story that they were a part of. How did that do on the web? What were the things that happened beyond just the citation of their business? And then, like I said, the final thing is if the take rate is low, we have a chance to look at better facts and adding more facts. So definitely some big changes here. Just want to make sure that people are starting to think about these as we move forward.
A couple of questions for you, Chad, here that came in. First, is there any opportunity for social media now that we're getting better placements on community newspapers?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have the answer on it today, but I'll tell you what we want to do. What we think is we're really close to, and we've been watching this and had it in our dev list for a long time, is this feed of content that we're going to be creating here, we see as a huge opportunity to start to bundle in more social media directly into these plans. Again, we're moving these plans towards digital PR and PR plans, so we don't have to have a standalone social media. There may be still a reason to have a standalone social media, but we'll be able to offer more built-in social media components so that, for example, when that story does go with your relevant fact cited in it, that you can automatically tweet that on the client's feed, and it'll be on a community newspaper, and they'll be excited to see it there. Same thing is true for newsletters. We think that we're really close here because we're curating this list of relevant content on a monthly basis. It's actually newsworthy information, and we'll actually be able to start perhaps even automatically adding in that feed of information into an email template that could go out as a newsletter. So we think that and again, we have all this data, which is always the great thing, is that because it's all being tracked in our database, we have this information that we can start to slice and dice it and look at it from different directions.
Great. Another question here, Jeff, for you is, can you review again what a take rate is?
Oh yeah, take rate would just be, if there were 10 impressions of your fact and the writer used it once, then the take rate would be 10%. So really, basically it's how many times it's used divided by the number of times it's shown, or impressions. Again, the idea here would be that if you had some very, very, very low take rate, and we don't really even have benchmarks because we're just getting this thing going, but if we could start to look at your facts compared to somebody else's and say it's pretty low, we would hit this kind of thing on the account review meeting, and maybe that would be an action that we want to take. Is we're not getting the placements we want. What can we do about that? Here are some ways to remediate that.
Great, thanks. And the last one that came in here, Chad, is can you, and actually there's a few more coming as we speak here, but can you talk about the difference between an RSS feed and PR web from your earlier slide?
Oh, sure. Yeah, so PR web, I'll go back to it here. Right, so PR web is we talked about this in the past, but they're a press release wire service, and they're one of the top 3 or 4 out there. What we have as a special offering to all of our clients is that we're able to get the PR web advanced press release, which if you look at the price on their website, I think it's $249. We're able to add that onto your program for $49. So that's why I strongly recommend, and the reason it's important is because 2 things. One is that we get a guaranteed, it gets published because it's a guaranteed press release syndication component or publishing compared to some of the other free press release sites we would use if you don't have the PR web upgrade. And the second thing is just their reach of the websites that actually pick up their press releases is way better than, again, if you use a free service. So it's a guaranteed to happen, and you get much better reach than if you were to try to go with a not guaranteed free service. Oh, and then RSS, RSS. So these are websites that aggregate RSS feeds, and again, we can publish out or syndicate out when a news story happens. What we often do today is we syndicate out in many cases, reinforcement links. So when we publish a story, we're able to add that to an RSS feed site that then just is able to get that content indexed a little faster. And more what we're doing with the RSS feeds is actually we, early on in the process, look at your account, and under your campaign details, if you go to instructions, there's actually a section there now called reinforcement links. So what we do is we actually rotate through the reinforcement links just to try to get those, make sure all that content is indexed appropriately. Any other ones, Adam?
No, I took care of the rest in the chat window. I think that closes it up.
Great. Okay, well, we have one last thing that we wanted to announce today, and then we can hit some more questions if there are any. The last thing I want to talk about is a web dashboard change we made that many people had asked about. So I want to make sure we get this broadcasted out as widely as possible. So several months ago, we launched a feature that allowed you to opt your end customer out of receiving the review pending client notifications. I'm sure we'll get some questions about what those are. But what we've now made a change this week to do is we have also removed the task needing review module on the home tab if you've opted out of review pending client notifications. And let me just give you the scenario that people were asking about. And many of you have asked about this, so thank you for your input and your feedback. And again, I want to make sure people know we listen and we address the input you guys give us. So the scenario was that the initial scenario was there are certain clients who I don't want to receive notifications when there's a communication between HubShout and you, the reseller. So we built a feature that our idea was that we could start to free up some of your administrative time by allowing us to go sort of direct in a private labeled way from HubShout directly to your client. And that was called the review pending client feature. So we could, if we needed to, for example, verify a local PIN number for a Google Plus verification, we could say, verification letter sent, when you receive it, please respond and give us the PIN number. We would put that in review pending client. That would automatically add anyone who had access to that account and then notify them via email and then place it on the home tab when they log in as a task needing review. So many people said, I want my client to be able to log into the dashboard, but I don't want them to be able to see, get notified on those types of notifications. So we gave them an opt-out, so they no longer got the email, but the problem was they were still seeing those tasks on the review pending on the dashboard under the task needing review. So now we've removed that module, they won't see them. Again, we just want to make sure that if there's any hesitation people have from using all the services we offer, we want to remove that reason, so we took that out. Any questions on that? Okay, well, that's really what we wanted to cover in today's webinar, and I will maybe give it 30 seconds here if there are any other questions that do come in, and just we'll wrap up with saying that, again, these two news plans that we've rolled out are available today in the dashboard. If you have an existing campaign that you would want to consider moving over to one of these plans, just talk to your AM, and we can do a very easy swap on that. If you have a new campaign, again, those are there to pick from the list today. And if anyone, we decided to start with the basic and intermediate, and instead of rolling out a whole second set of plans, but over time we will be looking at how these plans are working, and we may choose to tweak or add some of the higher volume programs and higher price point programs into this news category as well. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, go ahead.
Last couple of comments on this. I think the data you displayed that came from the last webinar is very fascinating. We all know that Google's pushing very hard this year to have SEOs kind of change some of their tactics. Some of those are still holding on to things from years ago. This whole idea of what links are okay and which ones aren't, I think is fascinating, because as we reviewed in the last webinar, Google's left a lot of that kind of to your imagination. It's fairly gray based on an intention to manipulate. So I think that data that we collected, where we basically said, it's hard for us to interpret this. What does everyone in the room and on the teleconference think? And it was pretty clear that things that are more PR-oriented, statistics-based linking, direct quotation, and news-oriented things present, and people generally agree, don't look like something that was manipulating the rankings is there really because it serves a real purpose. It's communicating a statistic, it's part of the news cycle, it's something someone said that's relevant or controversial, versus many of the tactics from years ago now read as very manipulative. So I think that data is very helpful for us, Chad, and that's why I'm excited about these new plans, because what you've demonstrated here is we've incorporated what people now believe is the right way to go after citations and placements now into our workflow, where you've got these two checkpoints, the writer's picking facts blindly based on they're appropriate for the story, and then, of course, the editor of the newspaper is deciding whether that information makes it or doesn't based on whether it's appropriate for their readers. I think both of which confirming that puts us in the right place for our interpretation, us all as a group, of what Google's saying to the best we can understand it. So I think this is really, really great forward-looking stuff. I look forward to high adoption on it.
And I agree as well. And again, thanks a lot for everyone, all the input and feedback. The changes we've made and will continue to make, and some of the directions we're heading in here are all largely, also very much driven by the things we hear and talking to all of you. So let's keep those communication channels open, and the monthly account review meetings and the SOW kickoff calls, and then of course in the forum and here in these webinars. So thank you very much for your participation today. We look forward to the next one. Talk to you soon.
Have a great afternoon. We'll see you.